Welcome to the SwimSwam podcast. I'm your host, Coleman Hodges. Joining me today, we've got a very special guest. He's the current COO of BetMGM. Before that, he was the Senior Vice President of Digital and Social at ESPN. He's been a venture capitalist. He's been with eBay, and he is a Duke swimming alum. Today, we are talking to Ryan Spoon.
Hello. Excited to be here. Big fan and subscriber and supporter to what you do. So thank you for all you're doing swimming.
Absolutely. And thank you for being here and joining us today. I'm excited to get your perspective because you're a swimmer, you understand our sport, you've got chlorine in your blood, but you also bring a different perspective. You know, you're with BetMGM now, you were with ESPN before, you know what audience engagement and the media perspective looks like. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. I mean, first of all, we've seen, in a general sense, we've seen swimming grow in the last couple decades, obviously with athletes like Michael Phelps, Katie Ledecky, Simone Manuel, and now Caleb Dressel. They're bringing eyes to the sport and some new eyes, especially with this being an Olympic year. But we also seen the development, the start of the International Swimming League, and them getting creative with our sport, bringing some nuances into it, and trying to get fan engagement from elsewhere, right? From new viewers. From your perspective, just from the media side, from what you've seen with ISL and from how you've seen swimming grow in the last 20 years, how would you grow swimming? How would you start to engage the swimming audience in a new way so that they come and they stay, and maybe even some new viewers come as well?
So I think it's a tremendously exciting time if you are a swimmer, if you're a swimming fan. And that's true every 4 years in an Olympic space anyways. But if you think about where we are today, there's a bunch of interesting things converging, which makes swimming a great spectacle, a great spectator sport. Think about where we are right now. So we've had, and I think live right now, but over the last several days, a bunch of conference championships. And I think, I don't want to misspeak, you know better than me, but I think the Pac-12 is going on right now. You can stream most all of that, right? And follow along. You can read the analysis on your side and follow along. You have great upstart like ISL, who is putting a different twist with really high production value, different kind of presentation, both visually but also athletically, with some of the different ways that they have organized the meets and the times. It's fantastic. You have an upcoming Olympics. And I think also important, you have an emerging platform for the athletes to drive audience and enthusiasm, and also business around, whether you call it, in other terms, what might be called the creator economy or whatever that would be. So someone like Caleb Dressel, who, and I have 3 young kids in the house, 2 are really passionate swimmers who follow him on social and follow his workouts on YouTube. It is a fascinating time for that. And so I think there's an ability for people to elevate themselves as stars, for the sport to elevate itself from a viewing standpoint. And for people like me who can't watch enough, whether you move between ESPN or ESPN Plus or the Olympic Channel or SwimSwam or ISL, like, I can access more today as a viewer than I ever could before. And that's before you get into, the most fun 2 weeks of every 4 years. Now, related to that, I think there's something inherently really special about swimming and track and certain sports, which is, it is perfectly measured. And I say this about swimming all the time, and it's obvious for those who do swim, but to this date, I could tell you what I swam in college, or at what point my times were. I could tell you my children's times, and you know exactly how good we are or aren't. It's perfectly measured. And that brings with it the ability to add some really interesting visuals. And again, credit to the ISL, credit to the Olympic presentations. If you think about something like football, the first down line is iconic. Well, the world record line is also iconic, and how you watch Phelps over the years pass and monitor and Dressel. It's you can do things with the way the sport works that you can't do in other sports. At the same time, it's complicated because, as any swimmer knows, you don't go best times every week. And so saying that for a average weekend in the ISL or at a championship, the world record line actually could be counterproductive, or someone's best time could be counterproductive, because that's not something that happens inside season, inside training, and all those mechanics. And that's where I think kind of the innovations that folks like the International Swim League, ISL, are doing are really potentially profoundly important. Like, how do you reinvent? I forget the name of what they call kind of that finale piece as the number of swimmers decreases, kind of the shootout, if you will. It's
The
great
skins
viewership.
races.
The
Yeah.
skins race, sorry. It's great to view. It just works on TV. It works on video really well. And they've said, look, if we're not going to have a world record or best time on every swim, what's the other way we can present this and add something that makes a day in, day out event really special? Because one of the great things about swimming, track, and these other sports, it's very evident success, right? Like, you just know who wins. And again, it's perfectly measured. And so I think it's a fantastic time across everyone, across the league or the organizer, across the athlete, who can now be a bigger name, make backing in different ways, build their own audience, across the fan, as a swimmer, and in your case, as a publisher. I think you have access to a bunch of different pieces of video, of insight to the different swimmers that would have been really hard to do 10 years ago, would have been hard to do 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, that you brought up a number of great points, and the first one I want to hit on is that you mentioned, swimming, as we all have been brought up to know, from my perspective, is that you don't go best times every week, right? And I'm sure that's how it was when you swam, and I think we've seen this the start of a paradigm shift in that regard, especially with meet clusters like the World Cup, like ISL, where people shave and taper for every single meet. And it started because they were getting paid, right? Because they're making money. But then now with the ISL and the huge, and the broadcast it has and the reach it has, they're incentivized to go best times for the points. And so from your perspective, especially like you said, you've got 3 kids too who are avid swimmers. Just as a swimming fan, would that be something that would interest you, to kind of see that paradigm shift, where instead of focusing on 1 or 2 big meets per year, you could have the focus be trying to go best times on a week-to-week basis?
So I would shift the question and the answer slightly and say, I think the important thing is to figure out how the definition of success or excitement from a viewer is not exclusively tied to a best time, right? So if you can make it, and again, I give a ton of credit to the ISL and the skins concept. If you can make it where there are other ways to drive that engagement. Think about, I think one of the great weekends of the sports year is the NBA All-Star Weekend. And the way that they have taken different skill sets, by the way, not different. Like, I was a breaststroker. I was pretty good at breaststroke. I was terrible at everything else. Well, they've taken something similar where the shooter has a role, and the point guard and the big man. And I think there's an interesting way to figure out how the presentation drives the excitement and the engagement. At the same time, the best thing for the sport over time is the growth of sustained excitement around the sport. And I think it's important over time that growth, I think, has to come outside of just a week of the year or one major meet. Again, that's complicated in a sport, in an Olympic sport, because that fourth year is so important. And so, and obviously, if you are the athlete, that's really what you're driving towards if you're at that echelon. Um, but it is important, and why I think if you think about what makes the NFL great in fantasy and those kind of things, is it's a 17-week schedule and it has a rhythm to it. And then the playoffs or March Madness, which we're about to hit towards, right? And I think a lot about, and I thought a lot about this at ESPN day in, day out, and I do in a different way at BetMGM, the rhythm of the sports calendar, the rhythm of a sports fan. And there is an importance when you're driving engagement, when you're trying to drive excitement, if you are a fan and you want to be excited, repetition, repeatable, predictable rhythm and repetition matter a lot. And it's really, it's really hard to drive that when there's one or two meets a year. And so I think that for all of us as swim fans, you got to figure out how there's more than, for me, that's probably in an average year, NCAA champs, which is super to watch. The camaraderie, the team, the times, right? Like it's fabulous, even though it's often non-standard times. So back to times, they're not necessarily the driver there. Obviously, you see Caleb Dressel throw a time at Florida, and you're like, okay, there's times. But that's not necessarily what makes that event so special. And then it's in off years, Pan Am, whatever that might be. What moves me about what ISL is doing is they've said, look, we're going to give it the same kind of production quality as an NBA game or a really high-end produced game, and condense it into something that's very viewable, whether that's an hour, 2 hours, 2 days a week, and drives, again, the rhythm of a season around it. And I think for those kind of things to succeed, just because of the reality of how the sport works, no different than track or others, you're not going to see world records every week. Maybe you will in the early going as new formats, but you're not going to, that can't be the hook over time. It has to be the team, the season, the points, the new format.
And I think we've seen ISL have success with that, in terms of generating excitement, right? Everyone who sees ISL loves it. For what it is, right? I think on the financial side, maybe people are skeptical about if it's sustainable or what it's going to look like in the future. But for what it's given us for the first 2 seasons, any swim fan who watches ISL is like, this is
Great.
awesome. I love it. Yeah. And so in an Olympic space, maybe from a USA swimming perspective, if you can't be it, if you're not ISL, do you, again, as just Ryan, the swim nerd, do you have ideas for just theoretically, how could we gamify this more? How could we make it more enticing to where every year it's not just one pro swim a month leading up to world championships or these Olympics? How do we make it more fun and exciting?
So move out the competition for a second. And I do think, and this is true always, I do think there are so many potential stars, and there are stars in the swimming world, but I would wrap my arms around that as a concept, as the sport of swimming, and get excited about those stars and encourage that in different formats. If you follow Michael Andrew, he's great on social, and that is a potential lever to be something broader. Caleb Dressel, like, there are big names that I think there should be comfort in growing together. and in doing things that maybe aren't as significantly organized. And I think we've seen in other sports that the growth of individuals can lead to the growth of the broader or greater kind of community. And I think there is benefit in being really welcoming to that concept. And I think with every passing, like there's never been a better time to be a personality in these in any perspective, whether it's an athlete, an artist, um, a creator, whatever that might be. Tomorrow will be the most exciting day to be that, and each day passing. Um, and that should be encouraged in this case, because I think that's how you drive new fans, right? Like people like me are going to follow anyways. I'm in. I used to spend, my hours in a pool to start the day and end the day, and now I spend my hours, um, uh, you know, dropping my kids off. So I'm already in. It's how do you convert my children? How do you convert their friends, the non-swimmers, the light touch swimmers, the sports fan into something like this? We know it's capable of doing that because it happens every 4 years. And it's a mixture of the sport just works beautifully on TV, whether you're a fan or not. No different than track, no different than certain events. Um, I do think we are always blessed with just great names and stars and personalities. Um, and this is your business. Then you got to get into the storytelling of it. And the storytelling can't just be the times, because the reality is, for the very best in the world, the goal is to go your best time, is to peak in 4 years. And that alone is tough if you're just trying to measure as a publisher property every 4 years. On the pure kind of gamification side, how do you make it uh, gamey? For instance, like fantasy did within football or baseball. And I think baseball is a really good example because it is such a nicely quantified sport. Um, Again, I think there are, and I think you guys have run different leagues and so forth. Golf has done a really good job here. I think there are ways to think about that. Again, you're probably in those cases speaking to the Uber fan already. So it's not necessarily audience expanding, audience building. It's for that user kind of a engagement, a depth factor. Um, but on the telecast side and the event format side, well, that might not work for a major event, a U.S. Open, a Pan Am, a Senior Nationals. It does work in an ISL type format where, all right, how do we turn a dual meet into something that's team oriented? How do we turn a dual meet into something that's point based? How do you make Adam Peaty, who is the greatest to ever do breaststroke, and then the next 25 times after that, how do you make him as impactful in a meet, knowing he's really one stroke? How can you twist it so that he's as impactful as a multi-stroke person or a distance swimmer who, the meet might not weigh towards a distance event for other reasons? How do you make him or her as valuable to that experience? And again, I think the ISL is figuring it out, but that's where I think gamification plays a big role. How do you elevate the stars, and how do you make sure that their impact is kind of quantified and understandable without necessarily having to set a world record or an American record with each swim? That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to admit that that's correct. We're not going to see world records.
Yeah. I mean, those are the 50-point games, and like those are they're going to happen. They're going to be great, and they're going to turn into the hits that are watched and rewatched. But you still need to figure out how the highlight reel of the 30-point game, which is a feat in and of itself, or the 10-block game, right? Like those need to be captured and celebrated, and just like a 50-point game.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I mean, you were, as I said before, you were the senior vice president, digital and social at ESPN. I'm wondering if you saw these things, weave and change during your time there. And if you could give us some examples of sports outside of swimming, kind of how they were able to grow and retain audiences, already being, football, baseball, basketball, already being such huge juggernauts in our country. Is that something you thought about of, all right, we're huge, but still, how can we keep growing? How can we keep growing?
Yeah, I think for all of them, we thought a lot about um, how do you drive fandom, uh, because the sustained success and growth of sports or a sport is rooted in interest and excitement and fandom. And now in ESPN's case, who benefits most from a broad set of fans? ESPN, but the league's the same, and they are all thinking about the same thing. Just like you wake up and think about how do I balance in a daily basis, reach more fans of swimming or the athletes, and drive greater um, usage and excitement around the people like me who are already coming. And so that was a lever. We thought about that, and you'd hear ESPN and their kind of priorities talk about uh, audience expansion, and that means how do you reach new audiences? Now, I'm a firm believer that a lot of that means you have to be in different platforms, different places. You need to be and reach them where they are, and some of those will be on your site. Some of those will open your magazine. Some of those will follow on social or YouTube or iTunes in this case. There's lots of different examples there. And I think this is something that everyone in sports and sports media thinks about. Um, there's other examples outside of an NFL and NBA. Like MMA is a great example, where that is a huge, huge brand with UFC. Um, it is uniquely formatted, right? It has, under the umbrella, it has rhythm, but the day-to-day team or player, or in that case fighter, does not have the same rhythm that you know to come, or know that you can replicate with if you're a fan of the Yankees, well, they're going to play 100 times and it's going to be 5 times a week and so on. That's just different here. But they are so great at elevating the personalities and the fighters, at driving excitement around each event, each fight, each match. And I think that's a good proxy. Um, I would say within soccer, you have similar examples as well. There's a lot of player movement. There's a lot of league movement, different formats. Um, and they've done collectively with a bunch of, again, leagues and organizations, figured out, like MLS has had a great few years. And they figured out how to elevate the season, the team, the player, and so forth. So there are examples of non-NFL who, right, like football's king, but of folks who have figured out how to really drive sustained growth, both in reaching new audiences, but going deep within audiences. And there's,
So,
again, I've said this a few times, there's never been a better time to do that. There are more avenues to exist now. It's hard to do that, and it takes time and effort, and but that's true not just as the team, the sport, but also the talent, the player, the swimmer, the golfer. PJ is a great example, right?
on that note, do you feel like this COVID year, we're rolling into month 12 of the COVID-19 pandemic? Do you feel like that has been an optimal time to grow sports fandom because everyone's stuck inside and kind of has no choice?
Um, I mean, no, I think none of us would have wanted to grow fandom this way. I do think it presents different challenges to different to different areas, or different sports, and different levels of sport. And that's something, for instance, as someone who, as a parent of swimmers, has been a real struggle. Just think about how pool time's complicated. And, my kids are young. They're swimming at 8 to 9:30 at night, and they're 10 and 8. That's really late. That's the only time they can get pool time. So it's tough to complain. There's others who have no pool time. And then there's others who, and so I think about, while there have never been a better time to be creative and to reach fans and so forth as the creator, unfortunately, um, for anyone in any sport, I think it's been so complicated to figure out how to, particularly in a sport like swimming that's so measured, and even as we all know, a couple weeks off is a setback. And ESPN did a great piece. No, sorry, it was I want to say SI did a piece on athletes, and it highlighted some swimmers who were figuring out how to train, and people building pools in their backyard. Everyone's trying to figure it out, and it's been really, I can only imagine how complicated it's been. But on the flip side, it's been really encouraging and exciting to see the results coming in from NCAAs, and what I'm sure will be amazing times thrown in in August. But I would rather not have been sitting in the seat for 12 months.
Well, you and me both.
Yeah.
On a more personal note, just for you, if we're talking about fandom, what drew you to swimming? You swam at Duke, like you said, it's in your blood now. Your kids are swim fans now. You're a fan of the sport still. I mean, what do you like about swimming, and what drew you and kept you?
So to me, it's I've said this in other factors and more how it relates to TV and viewership and so forth, but I think the fact that it is so measured is really just it's great, because there's no way to be great or to improve without doing the work. And with that, and I see this with, again, with my children, but they're seeing the same thing that, that any of us understand. You put in work, or you understand technique, or you try harder, or you eat better, or hopefully all those things. And that effort in often relates to some sort of improvement. And I think that's really gratifying and also kind of clarifying in some regards. Whereas, like, I play a lot of golf. Will I ever shoot a 60? No. But, can on a given day I be well better than anything I've done? Yeah, that's attainable. And there's also days where you shoot 10 strokes higher than your handicap. That doesn't exist in swimming. Right? Like, I to this day, I do masters meets every now and again, but you get out of the water and I know roughly what I went. And I used to be able to know pretty clearly what I went. And I think there's something really just great about that. It's a great sport, and there's other sports like that, but the ability to think about how you affect the outcome in a way that is really clearly defined is rewarding.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I think probably that's what draws a lot of people in, is just like you said, it's measured perfectly. And that is something I've never.
I think that is the opportunity for the viewerships as well. Like, you'll never forget that. Anyone who's watched swimming will never forget the Michael Phelps, butterfly touch. There's nothing that is qualitative about watching. Success, and who won. And when you watch Caleb Dressel, swim a 50 free and win by a body length at NCAAs, you understand how significant that is. Whether you know anything about throwing a 17 or the time he went versus a 19, you just realize the scale of which that victory is. That's why the 100-meter dash, the 200, 400, that's why I love it. I'm a terrible runner, but I understand. I have the same appreciation for things like that. It's just very clear as to what the win is, and that person doesn't just drop a second in a 50 free. It doesn't happen that way. So that's something that, is gradually tick by tick. I spent my whole life trying to drop tenths of a second. It's kind of crazy in concept.
It is crazy once you think about it.
Yeah.
But, but you're right. That is how the sport works. And there's certainly an aspect of beauty to that I think most, if not all, swimmers can appreciate. So to wrap up our conversation, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, you are now the COO of BetMGM. So you're dealing with gamification, but obviously also with betting as well. Have you? I'm curious if you have seen betting come into other sports, or if you have experience with betting in other sports, and what that because behind. We've talked about it before, but obviously the ISL has mentioned it, USOC, and our sources at the IOC have talked about bringing betting to swimming, and it's something that's kind of been been a whisper for a long time, and it's probably something that won't happen for a while, but it's on the horizon in one way or another. I'm curious to know what the benefits of betting from your perspective in sports can be.
So the benefit it's similar to what I was referring to earlier, which is whether you play we knew at ESPN with real clarity that the player who plays fantasy football watches and spends more time with football. By the way, I think this is relevant to sports cards now. I think, and the craze and the following around cards and the growth that you're seeing there, which is if you are very into John Morant, you're following Memphis. If you're very into Wander Franco, you're following Tampa. And I think that has ties as well into the gaming side. I keep coming back to the best thing for everyone around sports, a sport, is sustained excitement, fandom, engagement around the sport, around the event, around players. And there's lots of ways to impact that. And again, I think some of that is through gamification around it. Some of it is through presentation and production. Some of it is through storytelling. Like, you have as big a role here as the TV side, as the athlete side. And I think all of it moves together, and growing excitement around swimming is just great for swimming. It's great for the swimmers. It's great for the top tier athletes. It's then ultimately comes back, and it's great for, if it's a league, if it comes back, it's great for the TV provider. Right. And there are lots of examples of that. Again, I think UFC is a really good example of that. But again, I spent years previously in just different ways. I'm sure you and the team think about the same thing, which is, how do you reach new potential fans of swimming? Do they come in via swimming? Do they come in via a specific swimmer? Do they come in because they're tied to a team? How do you reach them? Then how do you get them to spend more time? And ultimately for you, become a subscriber, or become a YouTube subscriber, or get the mag, whatever that might be. But that it's going to be hard to do those latter things if the person isn't engaged or shown interest in driving deeper engagement. And to drive that deeper engagement, it's a mixture of things like how compelling are the stories, how compelling are the athletes, what can you do on the game side, whether that's fantasy or something else, what can you do on the different presentation side, right? There's a difference between watching a 4-hour prelim and then a 2-hour finals and saying, you know what, like I saw some great highlights on Twitter and SwimSwam YouTube. And I think you got to get comfortable. Everyone has to get comfortable saying, I have to satisfy all of those folks, and hopefully move them up that chain. But if I only focus on the deepest conversion, deepest engaged fan, guess what? You're going to be talking to people like me who you already talked to, and you got to figure out how you find the top of the funnel, the bigger audience there.
I love that answer. And Ryan, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat with a bit. I think that's a great ending point. But before we sign off today, I noticed the light was changing. No,
we got some rare sun here. Still covered in snow.
No, nice. Yeah, Ryan, before we sign off today, any parting thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
I think, first of all, keep up what you guys are doing. I'm such a fan, and as a fan, appreciative. I think it's important that you exist. I think it's important that you guys have a great team. I think it's important that you continue to grow. And then similarly, I think it's important that we all support the athletes that we're excited about. Because I do think that a lot of the future for these Olympic sports is important, that the athletes, and again, we're so lucky to have great athletes in swimming at all ages and so forth, have meaningful followings and can grow their audience. And that's a good thing for the sport. It's a good thing for them personally. And as a fan, it's a good thing for us as well.
You've been listening to the SwimSwam podcast. Stay tuned for new episodes every week. You can take SwimSwam podcast on the go by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Look for links in the description below, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos as well.